we want to be really aware of the fact that we don't want to give, if you already have a potential blooming failure to launch situation, or you have a full-blown, let's say, failure to launch situation that's really kind of concretized itself and it's concreted, into your family system and structure, that we make some changes now, because it's only going to get worse. Welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with Thomas Miller. Are you tired of your tweens, teens, and young adults' negative behaviors and poor choices holding you emotionally hostage, controlling your family, and ruling your life? If you answered yes, then you are in the right place. This podcast is a community for courageous parents just like you who come here to gain effective tools, skills, and take action so they can change their tween, teen, or young adult's life and improve their family's future. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Four Peaks Parents Podcast with your host, Thomas Miller. Today's topic is all about failure to launch. This is a super relevant topic to all my Four Peaks parents clients out there. More and more, that is the kind of big driver of a lot of the families that engage with me. Used to be, it still is, of course, tons of teens that are kind of running roughshod all over the family. And oh my God, parents are losing sleep and want to pull their hair out and just, are walking on eggshells and just feel completely overrun by their teen. But more and more, there are a lot of families that have the 20-something-year-old in the house. And so this whole topic is really dedicated to those families that are struggling. And again, it's becoming more and more and more prevalent. There's a lot of reasons for it. We're going to get into it. And we're not only going to get into it, we're going to get into how the hell do you get out of it, right? Most importantly. So what I'm talking about here when I say failure to launch, just to be clear, I'm not talking about someone who's simply living in the house, right? Someone could be living in the house. You could have a 23-year-old living in your house, fully employed, contributing financially to the house, could be even cooking a meal once a week or twice a week, could be kicking in on food shopping, could be kicking even rent. That's not failure to launch, right? That's a pretty healthy situation that obviously is vetted and makes sense, right, for that 23-year-old or 25-year-old even, and that family. That's a decision that most likely feels good to everybody. Failure to launch is a situation that does not feel good to everybody. And the young adult as well, more often than not, is not happy because they feel infantilized. It's a very common thing. When I work with parents in the Four Peaks Parents Program, sometimes I have the pleasure of actually meeting their young adult, and the parents are always like, how are we going to frame this conversation? What lead up do you need? I'm like, nothing. Just pop them on the our weekly session, right? And let me do my magic, right? Let me do my thing. And immediately I start engaging them, and I'll get them to admit that they're not happy with this current situation, and they're probably carrying some shame. They don't feel great. So it's not that necessarily the young adult, if they're 22, 25, 26, even 30, that's pretty extreme, is loving life too. They're not. Everyone is pretty angry, frustrated, kind of feeling, resentful. And more often than not, what has happened on the front end is the family avoided a bunch of things that they could have done, which is why I built this program, which is why I have this podcast. It's all about giving parents tips and tools and strategies to make a shift today. Because if we fall into the traditional ways of parenting, these issues, these symptoms will metastasize, and it's so much harder to try to take this crap down later on. I always say it's like, imagine fighting Goliath, when Goliath is exhausted and tired and malnourished versus fighting Goliath after a full night of sleep and a great 3-course, meal and all that good stuff. We don't want to allow symptoms to really breed. And it's kind of like mold, I always say, mold grows in dark, dank basements. So symptoms are that way, where they breed and they grow and they bloom, right, in darkness when we're not looking. So we as parents really want to make sure that we're catching things when they're small. We want to be proactive, want to make changes now. So again, I'm talking about young adults who haven't fully stepped into adulthood. That means they're not, they haven't obtained a job. They are not contributing financially. They, again, might not be feeling so great about themselves. And there could be definitely a component of mental health issues, of course, that is organic, that could be real, of course, depression, anxiety, whatever. And that, of course, is a contributing factor. And of course, if you have a young adult who is struggling with, something significant like bipolar, OCD, of course, they deserve some empathy and compassion. That being said, having them just live in your house, right, without any clear adulting expectations is not a healthy treatment plan and is not going to minimize their symptomatology. In fact, it's going to exacerbate, right? Anxiety particularly, and symptoms in general, in addition to them being like mold and loving, the darkness, they also love time, right? So anxiety sort of will expand to the time it's given. When we're asked to sort of act, I always use the analogy of kind of walking around a pool. How many people, I'm sure, can identify with having a young adult that pontificates all day long and analyzes, paralyzes, and it's akin to walking around the pool and saying, should I swim? I don't know. Maybe I should. Maybe I shouldn't. I'm not really sure. What's the temperature of the pool? What if I don't like the pool? What if? A lot of what ifs, right? Often about negative outcomes. That's anxiety versus if your young adult just jumped in the pool, most likely they're not going to drown and they might even enjoy it. So we want to be really aware of the fact that we don't want to give, if you already have a potential blooming failure to launch situation, or you have a full-blown, let's say, failure to launch situation that's really kind of concretized itself and it's concreted, into your family system and structure, that we make some changes now because it's only going to get worse. And if we stay on the traditional path and keep parenting in the traditional way of looking the other way, or these are the two extremes that I tend to see, is avoidance, eventually that family, those parents, get sick and tired of being sick and tired, and then they make threats. Then they start yelling and screaming, right? And both of those extremes, the avoidance and looking the other way, is ineffectual. The yelling, screaming, making threats, and particularly not following through on those threats, highly ineffectual. And a lot of parents really struggle to find that balance between being supportive and being challenging. And a lot of times parents are avoiding the issue because they don't want to be too cruel, they don't want to be too harsh, or more often than not, what I tend to see is they feel guilty because, again, they didn't ask their kiddos to do some of that heavy lifting earlier on. And what we really want to look at here is some of the factors that contribute. And then we'll look at how we take those factors down or how we address each of those factors. And we're going to end with tons of strategies and tips and tools. And again, this just might be the beginning. This might be the first time you're kind of getting ready, right? I always talk about readiness in the stages of change model, meaning that sometimes we're pre-contemplative. We're not even contemplating change. Sometimes we're contemplating change. Sometimes we're preparing for change. Sometimes we're in action phase, and sometimes we're in maintenance. So as you hear this, think about where you are, because if you get into a maintenance phase around, let's say, having at least honest, open conversations with your teen about how this current situation isn't working, keep that maintenance phase. Don't backslide into pre-contemplative. If you're preparing to charge them rent, cool, right? And obviously feel free to reach out. You can engage me through the Four Peaks, parents program, and I can provide, step-by-step a process that will help them, navigate out of this current dilemma. And we'll give you all the tools and ways to do that in a heart-centered, firm but benevolent manner. And you'll benefit from all the videos that are set up specifically to help you take a look at, first and foremost, auditing how we got here, helping you become the master of your emotions. That's the second peak. Upgrading your toolkit. That's the third. And finally, rewriting your family story. And we'll build it in a way that your young adult will feel empowered and want to come along. Because again, they want to come along on this journey. They do not want to remain in your house, particularly without a job, particularly without a purpose. They just don't. They don't feel great about themselves. They're manifesting a lot of shame. So a couple of things that maybe have led you here, or you and your family, could be, again, like I said, that your young adult does struggle with anxiety, does struggle with some mental health symptoms. My heart goes out to them and you, right? That makes things a little bit harder. They have an invisible backpack. Get it? That's real, and we want to validate that. But we want to provide good treatment, meaning we want to help them. If they have OCD, we don't want to reassure them. And they do need to explore, right, evidence-based modalities like exposure response prevention therapy, potentially medication management, potentially a litany of other exposures. Getting a job is a great exposure. Believe it or not, again, it's hard to be anxious, right, when you actually have to perform a role. I mean, you could have anxiety, of course, what's called anticipatory anxiety about your job and that day. But when you're there, more often than not, you're actually performing and it's actually inoculating you against your anxiety. Whereas when you're spinning in your room all day long, if you're that young adult and doing nothing other than living vicariously through Instagram or overspending as a way of coping, or smoking too much pot or playing video games, whatever that is, there's a suspension, right, of your mental health. It's actually kind of like permafrosting your mental health. It's not helping. There are economic factors. It is tough nowadays, right? The cost of goods, the cost of rent, the cost of houses. It's harder these days to find stable jobs for sure. And that, part-time work might be more and more kind of the norm. So that's real. The big thing I see that has created this kind of epidemic, if you will, is overparenting. A lot of parents stepped in way too early, way too much, way too often. The parents took too much of the decision-making from that child. This includes everything from stress management to financial management. I see so many parents that never wanted their kids to face adversity, so they removed all those speed bumps. And of course, that creates a sense of over-reliance on the parents for everything: emotional support, career support, financial support. It really has a shunting effect on that child's development. And it's not, a surprise that now, as they're asked to step into adulting and make decisions on a daily basis, they feel like an imposter. That's where imposter syndrome really comes from. There's two ways to address imposter syndrome. Number one is figure out what are the competencies or the skills that you need, and begin to, in a micro goal sort of way, right, create some micro hacks, right, and start adding those skills so that you obviously become more competent. The other way is just to decrease the expectations, right? Instead of focusing on comparative analysis of you versus your friend who's, an anesthesiologist or whatever, or is a lawyer or a doctor or an entrepreneur or whatever that is, focus on micro wins and start creating micro goals and time box your day. And what can I do today in 25, 35, 45-minute increments, and give yourself a pat on the back. So those are great strategies too to help your kids, is to kind of reduce the pressure and make the expectations smaller. I see so many young adults that are, whipping themselves with this imaginary shame stick because they're not Insta famous. They're not that influencer, not that YouTuber. They don't have the big house. They don't have the huge company, but yet they haven't even taken one little step. And they have opportunities today to change the narrative that they have about themselves, and to get some dopamine hits, and to feel good about the fact that they have an $18 an hour job or $22 an hour job, or they're just moving toward a passion. They have an internship. They're on a path toward a certificate. They're becoming a licensed electrician, whatever that is. It's just so important, to help your young adult remove that pressure to succeed. Because what I see so often from young people that I work with in my practice is they're putting so much pressure on themselves to succeed, combining that with a level of uncertainty of knowing what their end goal or purpose ultimately is. I see a lot of binary thinking is what I call it, or black and white thinking, where they're always saying like, I don't know if I want to be doing this when I'm 35, or they're going all the way to the end of whatever that first choice is and saying, yeah, I don't know that I want to be a software developer for 20 years. I don't know that I want to be an architect for the next 35 years. When in fact, it's like I'm passionate about architecture and maybe I go work at an architectural firm and I learn vis-a-vis through that process, as well as make some money and put some food on the table for my family and begin to kind of create some momentum. So I see a lot of that as well. The cool thing here, believe it or not, is we as parents are the biggest like engine and driver for change in this whole failure to launch phenomenon. We really are. There's so many things as parents that are out of our control, and it's easy to get overwhelmed and feel like, what the hell can I ever do? You know, like, how can I ever impact change? This is not one of them, which is so cool. So here's how we make that shift, okay? We have to immediately shift from the fixer to the coach, okay? So think about it. When your young adult comes to you and asks you a question, you know, how do I solve this? What do I do? Or projects a bunch of helplessness onto you or hopelessness, you need to just shift to like, what do you think is the best course of action? You know, where do you want to go? Where do you want to start? What have you tried? You know, what's the next right action? Put your foot on the next right rock, etc. You're the coach. You are not the fixer. You're not the put on the hat and make the phone call. So many of the families that I work with, I have to help them slow the fudge down and suspend their proclivity to fix. Just last week, I was working with this family who their daughter is finally out of the house, which is great. She went to sober living. She had mental health and drug addiction issues. And they, through my work, got them from pre-contemplative around contriving the outcome of asking their daughter to do hard and to lean in. I connected them with an interventionist. Not only are the families who work with me getting all the video modules and all of the weekly sessions over 90 days, there's 12 sessions in total. And there's a whole host of a library of videos that are me giving them tips and tools in real time in a highly individualized manner. They also get my network. And so we were able to create an intervention for their daughter, and their daughter went to a structured sober living place and did fantastic. And now she stayed, which is the right thing to do in that community, because, hey, when you've built a community of sober people, places, things, you got a sponsor, you got a job, why would you leave, right? And so this mom was like freaking out because her daughter, who does struggle with mood dysregulation issues, is kind of like a subacute bipolar. Her medication, they got pinged, you know, from like, I forget if it was CVS or whatever, but like her medication was running out. And they've seen the dark side. They know what happens, right? When their daughter's Wellbutrin runs out, right? When she's not on that mood stabilizer. And so she was like, what do I do? Do I run up there and give her the meds and da-da-da? I was like, no, you just like say like, hey, what up? Just got this thing. Just got this notification. I'm going to shift this to you so you could get these notifications. So then, you know, right, when your meds are up, and just sharing, right? Just putting this on the radar. That's that shift, right? From fixer to coach or supporter, right? Huge shift. We want to encourage failure, right? Again, particularly with you, if you have a black and white thinker on your hands. So many young adults, again, they're so binaried in their thinking. It's all or nothing. It's, I don't know if I want to be an electrician for the rest of my life. I can't be in an office for the rest of my life. That's fine. That's cool that you know that innately, that you're not drawn to being in an office, nor could I. However, let's do something today, right? What can we do today? You know, let's develop a habit where we wake up and we get to the gym, right? And then after the gym, we don't immediately go home. It's called habit stacking. We go to a cafe and you apply to 4 or 5 jobs on Indeed. And then you connect with 5, do 5 DMs on LinkedIn, and you begin to build that network, right? Let's be curious. Let's explore more, right? Let's kind of titillate those passions rather than shutting them down. Let's not focus on why it won't work. Or again, this idea of such a longitudinal perspective. I don't want to do this for the next 25 years. That paralyzation around believing you have to follow every little path to its end and then reverse engineer today. See a lot of people putting so much pressure on, I need to know the end. And if I don't love the end, then I don't even want to take the first step. So you could help change that by really busting out some pom-poms and encouraging your kid to just start. Easy one right here. Number 3, slowly step back and recede into the background. Super important. My kids have heard me say this hundreds of times. I'm willing to listen, but I'm not willing to fix it, or I'm willing to listen and kick around some ideas with you, but you got to own the outcome, or you got to own the solution. Those are really important things that we can do. I'm willing to listen, but I'm not going to solve it for you. I'm willing to kind of kick around some ideas. It's that coaching role again, but stepping back slowly. It doesn't mean like tomorrow you don't respond, but if your kid is texting you every 5 seconds in a crisis and you've turned yourself into an ER and you're their crisis worker and their ER nurse and their psychiatrist and their, caseworker, right? Those are too many hats you're wearing, and it's important to start taking them off. And you could front load like, hey, just so you know, I'm going to take a little bit more of a backseat role because I really want to empower you and want to foster your resilience. You can let them know that. They might not like it, right? They may be so used to you solving all these things that it could feel like a rejection to them, and they could get a little wiggy, which is fine, and a little anxious. But guess what? We can't stay here. We can't stay in this norm. This norm is not healthy. We got to get off this island, right? And this is how we do it. You got to set boundaries. If they're texting you all hours of the night, you can't respond, right? You cannot be in the situation that you conditionally condition the behavior, right? So we can set up times that, hey, I'm willing to sit down with you and explore, colleges or explore careers Saturday morning at 10:30, right? I'll have a cup of coffee and my laptop open. Come and join me, right? We want to begin to empower them, right, to take greater responsibility, and we need to be less the solution. And so by setting boundaries, again, boundaries are commitments we make with ourselves internally. So it needs to sound like when my kid is in crisis and, being Chicken Little and saying the sky's falling, I'm going to do this or this differently, right? And give them opportunities for how they can access you, how they can get you. Of course, we want to have an open door. Of course, we want to be accessible, but we also want them to, colonize their own time and begin to realize that they have to, as I said earlier, time box and set up different agenda items for the day. They need to habit stack, right? Just the other day, I was working with this family and we set up a whole situation where they're having a family meeting on a weekly basis which is something I'm a big fan of, to let their teen know in a very systematized way that they're going to be pulling back in terms of the doing for, but they're also going to be ramping up the expectations. So we set up a timeline of when this teen will need to pay rent. They're not going to renege on that. That is a non-negotiable. Not the teen, it's a young adult. The young adult will be paying rent. The young adult is 24 years old, is currently unemployed. They're not going to deviate on that. That's something they said, not in anger. They give a timeline. They're giving actually an uber generous 90-day runway for when the rent is due. They're willing to say, hey, we're willing to support you and play a coaching role to help you get that job, and throw a bunch of things at us. Let us know if there's any way we could help you. We're happy to connect you with a few aspects of our network, but we're not going to do everything for you. That's a really nice thing, and we're going to meet every week and we're going to see how's it going. They're not micromanaging. They have one meeting a week. They're not going to deviate on that expectation and that deliverable of the rent. So those are clear boundaries. That's a boundary. They are setting a boundary with themselves that if their loved one doesn't pay rent and it really plays itself out, then we'll have to cross that bridge when we get there. Then we'll have to explore whether or not they need to even up the ante more, and they may or may not need to, establish even more clarity around what their expectations are in terms of what is required to live in the house. Many families I've worked with, get to a place not in anger. This is not a threat, but after a series of saying, just so you know, this is not really working for us. We're really starting to work with Thomas or explore new avenues. We're looking at different options. It's a nice way to say in a non-threatening way that we can't stay here. You can then come back and change the tone on those weekly meetings to say, we're really starting to consider whether or not this is a sustainable solution. We're willing to endorse treatment for you. We're willing to subsidize, structured sober living, or pay half of that or all of that or whatever that is. But we're really starting to think this is not working. Then eventually you can get to a place, particularly after they failed, so to speak, at so many different expectations and micro deliverables. Again, paying rent, we're not talking $2,000 here. Might be $300, might be $400, might be $500, depending upon the situation. That's something that their young adult could do even at a 20-hour-a-week job. So every family is different, and I gargle that family situation. That's why we always start in the Four Peaks Parents Program with the family audit as the first peak. And then we develop a really clear plan and pathway forward. But that all starts with setting boundaries with themselves. They have to be willing to do this work and roll up their sleeves and begin to ask their young adult to step into adulthood. We want to offer support, not control. Super important, right? So a lot of parents are trying to contrive outcomes that I work with. I've definitely been there myself. I've definitely tried to create some outcomes for my oldest teenager at times. So I need to do a better job of encouraging my child and play a mentor role than rather trying to control or contrive the end goal, right? Because the more we push, the more our kids are going to resist. But that doesn't mean that we don't have the weekly meeting about maybe their grades if it's a teen. And I always encourage families to once a week look at, the grades at the school posts rather than up the kid's butt every day. That's not a good look, right? Not a good feel for anybody. Same thing again with, hey, how's it going? Are you on track to meet your, the goal that we set, 90 days of paying rent? Just so you know, we're not reneging on that. We love you. We want to support you. That's why we're doing this. Let us know how we could support you. Because ultimately, we want to really focus on helping them learn financial independence. You can, in addition to that weekly meeting, say, hey, we're willing to offer some budgeting support, some saving support. Maybe we can create some concrete, small expectations, right, around a job, rent, et cetera, whatever that is, right? We'd match what you put away for last month's rent. And we just really want to also, again, encourage those passions as much as humanly possible, because so many young adults I see, again, just they put themselves in this bind of saying, I don't really know what I want to do for the rest of my life, right? And yet I'm also going to put so much pressure on myself that I have to get the first thing perfect or right. And the more that we can just break that down for them and realize that they can still have their passion, and their passion might even be in the 5 to 9 space, and their non-passion could be in the 9 to 5 space. And you don't have to give up on the 5 to 9 space. I say that all the time to young adults. Just get the job, take the pressure off. It'll give you a sense of esteem. It gets you out of the isolation. It creates less time for pot smoking, less time for video games, less time for Instagram, gives you some money in the pocket, gets your parents off your back. You can still have the 5 to 9. You can leverage your 5 to 9 toward your passion, right? Toward that bigger purpose. So let's continue to stay curious and really ask them a bunch of open-ended questions. What do you care about? What are you passionate about? It really will help them head to the gray and get out of that black and white thinking. So if you have a young adult who has not launched, please reach out. Please, I'm here to help. It is bread and butter. I do this every day. I've helped so many families create a pathway for success that has allowed them to avoid splitting, avoid yelling and screaming, avoid threatening and not following through, and avoid avoiding. And they now have successful outcomes because their young adult is launched. Their young adult has a sense of purpose, a job. The young adult feels more empowered, and everyone feels like they're winning. So I'm happy to help you. I hope this was helpful. Please don't look the other way. Please take action today. If you need more help, just reach out. And please, if you're not already, follow my newsletter, which you can find more about in the description for this episode. Thanks so much and be well. Bye. Hey everyone, Thomas here. First off, it means the world to me that you took the time to listen to my podcast. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Also, If you want to receive the latest podcast updates, as well as expert parenting tips and practical strategies for navigating your tween, teen, or young adults challenges directly to your inbox, then sign up for my newsletter. The link is in the description. And most importantly, if you're tired of feeling overwhelmed, stuck, stressed, and are losing sleep because you're constantly worried about your tween, teen, or young adult, your first step is to realize that you still have a choice and can do something about it. I'm ready to help you take action and create the results you desire today. Just go to 4peaksparents.com and book a free strategy call. Let's do this. Last thing, while you were listening to this show, who was the one person that you thought could really benefit from hearing it? Please share it with them.